Hi, I wanted to come on and I'll make this as briefly as I can. I want to enjoy my Sunday, but I wanted to share my master's thesis so far, my working master's thesis. It's on the Bible. So I want to give you some um, brief brief introductions to why I'm talking about this right now. Well, I'm looking for work right now. There's a bunch of things. I'm facing eviction, impending eviction, and if you'd seen my previous video, I'll see if I can put a link in above somewhere. Click on video where you can see that. But there was this nice friend of mine who drove me down to the Department of Social Services and where I filed for public assistance, and so forth, and SNAP. Hopefully, I'll get that. Um, and as we were driving back, he's a biblical scholar, and he and I were talking, and he was talking about the Moses Scroll, a book that he'd read about the Moses Scroll, and so I told him excitedly about my working thesis. He asked if I was interested in going for a PhD, if I had ever thought of going for a PhD. And I said, yes, I have, but I have had other things on my mind, other things on the plate, so to speak. Um, it's I need food, basically. I need money and I need food and I need shelter. But this has been something I've been fascinated by since somewhere in college. I'm Jewish. I'm proudly Jewish. I grew up in a Reformed temple. Um, Sadly, the Reformed temple meets not in its own building anymore, but in a separate spot. And even within the congregation, I have seemed to know more or been more knowledgeable in certain subjects than a lot of the congregants, and it makes things difficult. All right, so I would like to create this thesis. My mom had a doctoral degree, and I just have two bachelor's degrees. So I would like to put this knowledge to good use, and get credit for it, real frankly, and contribute to society. All right, so I'm going to be talking about several different authors and what I call researchers, people who have proposed their own um, their own findings in biblical academia. All right, so Moshe Kline. All right, perhaps I should straight out describe what I propose to be the writing of the Tanakh. All right, so I suspect rather that the five books of Moses were written as one unit in one authorial effort, and then there were insertions at the end of Deuteronomy that tacked on the Nevi'im section of the Tanakh and then the Kotavim section of the Tanakh. Okay, I should explain the what is the Tanakh? What are these Jewish terms? Okay, so there's as much as I don't like to refer to it, I'm not Christian, but I'll call it the Old Testament for right now. Um, the Old Testament has what the Christians call the Old Testament, the Jews call the Tanakh. The Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Kotavim. Kotavim. Um, and the Torah, as I have found, comes from a term meaning like throwing, or refer to it may refer to yireh as a root. Anyway, it's the Torah. It's the five books of Moses. Then the Nevi'im are roughly translated as prophets, and then the Chotavim literally means writings. So there was um, there was a difference in the ordering, the sequence between the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, and the Christian Bible, and especially when you get to between Protestants and Catholics, I guess there are differences, but in sequence and so forth. Um, it's lost. All right, so this pattern that I found out about was lost. Well, became lost. If you look at the Old Testament, sorry, if I keep clicking here, it's the stupid Safari bookmark sync agent quit unexpectedly. I have to keep clicking ignore because it keeps popping up. So that's what I'm doing here. So the end of each section, as found, I believe, by Sale Hamer, I forget his first name, seemed to be that the end of the final book of each section foreshadowed the topic or the purpose of the following section, like the end of Deuteronomy, the end of Torah, mentions that there was no prophet like Moses, which then foreshadows the prophet section in the next, coming up next after the Torah. That would be Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and then the major prophets, and then 12 minor prophets. Notice the term, the number of minor prophets being 12. I'm a mythicist. I don't believe that the Torah actually happened. I don't believe that unless there's archaeological evidence, I'm wary about presuming that these things actually happened. Okay, so this is really annoying me. So at the end of the prophet section, Malachi, see, it's different in between the Jewish, what I call the original Jewish sequence, and the Christian or the Catholic or the Protestant version, the ordering. It puts Malachi in some other weird. It rearranges the whole thing. Chronicles is the final book in Kotavim, which is the final section of the third part of the Tanakh. So that's the final part. And so I believe that an editor inserted verses at the end, at the very least, inserted verses at the very end of Deuteronomy so as to link up with the next part, Nevi'im, and then the part after that, which would be Kotavim. It seems very clear that Moshe Kline, who found an intricate design, elegant pattern of 86 different units, 86 being geometrically equal to the term Elohim. Elohim is one of the two terms for God, primarily in the Torah and the Tanakh, I guess. What I'm saying is Moshe Kline's design, that the layout that you don't notice when you are reading it linearly, but when you see it holistically, visually, geometrically laid out, it's very apparent. That's why some verses repeat and so forth. All right, so Moshe Kline, I'll say gave us, or I'm relying, how do I put this? Okay, so I'll just refer to it as Moshe Kline's work. So Moshe Kline's work gives us the visual original of Torah, clearly designed that way. And then I suspect that, all right, Joshua then continues on from Moses. Now, it seems weird that that the Torah, if designed to be 5 books, and that's it, just a single work of 5 books, should end, and then Joshua picks up in some other writing where he goes into the promised land and so forth, and conquers the promised land and so forth. it just seems weird. So I suspect that those parts were put in to connect it to um, a following section, Nevi'im, with Joshua being the obviously the point at which let me rephrase this. So you have the 5 books. Moses receives and gives the commandments, and then some later writer or editor, and this thesis I'm working on argues against the documentary hypothesis, which has been the primary academic accepted way that the Bible was written. So you have the Torah. Then someone came in to insert portions at the end of Deuteronomy, talking about Joshua, and then that leads into the next section. And you have the verse at the end of Deuteronomy, there was no other prophet like Moses. Then you have the prophet section after that, second section of the whole Tanakh. You have Joshua conquering and establishing a place in the promised land. And then you have the prophets. There seem to be, at the very least, sequential, like inserted linkages, perhaps the entire texts of the minor prophets and the major prophets. I believe there are 3 or 4 major prophets, and then the 12 minor prophets. As I said before, 12 is a very suspected, very suspicious number, because you have the 12 tribes, the 12 months of the year, 12 this, 12 that. So then you have Kotavim, which would be the writings, the section after that. Malachi, I don't remember exactly what the final line in Malachi, but but that then would lead to the 3rd section of the Tanakh, which would be the writings. And even within the Psalms and the Proverbs, there seems to be an organizational layout, like a plan. These Proverbs or Psalms, I think they're Psalms, are sandwiched together like a chiasmus. I want to go into that structure further in this thesis. And then at the very end of Chronicles, I wondered the final line, about that final line. So if you're following this pattern, the final line of each section leads to the next section, foreshadows the next section. And that kind of pattern you can also find linearly in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. At the end of each book of the 5, there's a key word, like Egypt. I think Egypt is the final word at the end of Genesis, and then like wanderings is the final word at the end of the next book, and so on. And there's Egypt, and then like wanderings, and then I think desert, or wilderness. I think however you translate it is wilderness or desert, and then Jericho and Israel, so forth. I think Israel is the final word in Deuteronomy. But anyway, so you have this evolutionary pattern that seems specifically designed, intentionally designed, so as opposed to unintentionally designed. So there is precedence for something like that, some kind of final word or final book, which then implies what comes next. So you also have Oh, so you have the final word in Chronicles, which is the final book. As I said before, the ordering between the Jewish Bible and the Catholic and I guess the Protestant and so forth, other Bibles is different. The final word at the end of Chronicles is "Let him go up," or "He will go up," um, and he will go up. But it seems lacking in the rest of the sentence. Like how will he go up and where would he go up? And I was using Claude AI to in terms of this stuff, going back and forth in conversations, and it suggested perhaps that was intentional, that it was left lingering. Because I asked it, well, given these things, what would you project to be the next section? If there were a fourth section, what would it be about, and so forth? And I guess it would be about messianic um, completion or realization. And I'm not a Christian. I'm Jewish. I suspect that the Christian concepts were Roman propaganda. There we go. There's a controversy. Right down below in the comments. There's a way to get comments in the comment section. I suspect that that was propaganda. However, it's I believe that that was propaganda based on actual concepts, Jewish concepts of what a Messiah would be. The Jewish, first of all, the term Messiah comes from Mashach, which means anointed. So Cyrus would be a Mash. I believe actually Cyrus is noted as a Mashach, Messiah in the Tanakh. Simply someone anointed by God for a purpose. So the priests would be Mashiachim or messiahs. But there, especially during the Roman occupation, there was, and before that, there have been earlier occupations of Israel, that a Messiah would come along that would throw off the yoke, the occupation of by foreigners, and they could have their sovereignty, and that all the mitzvot would be followed, and it would be a golden age, and so forth. So, I'm wondering if the editor was focused on this concept of a messianic age or a Messiah figure coming, um, and took and added on elements tacked on at the end of Deuteronomy, therefore the end of Torah. I've looked into Honigwachs, Rabbi Yehoshua Honigwachs, finding about or his conception of a seed flourishing cycle, where in the Bible, where you have the beginning being the seed, and then there's a next stage, and then a next stage, and then next stage, and then it recycles back. I'm wondering how this conforms to cycles, which are very evident. The existence of cycles are very evident in the Torah. Now I'm looking toward the rest of the Tanakh for those other cycles. I doubt that the judges were actually real. I'm curious about the names. For a long, long while, I've been curious about the names. Ezekiel, the actual Hebrew name is Chazakiel, which means strength, as in the phrase Chazak, Chazak, means strength to strength. And Obadiah, Obadiah, which would mean serves Jehovah, and other names. Malachi literally means my messenger. I'm guessing that that's not really, if I'm guessing it's a literary person. For a little bit, as I was corresponding with Claude AI, I was wondering about Ezra. I don't assume what's in the Tanakh is absolutely true. Um, for a little bit, I was wondering about Ezra being having been a real historical person. It said that it could not find any reference outside of the Tanakh as to Ezra's existence. However, elements in the book of Ezra um, are findable, are can be found outside of the Tanakh itself. Um, I'm suspicious about Malachi being the final book of prophets. So you begin with Yehoshua, which literally means uh, Jehovah saves, um, or Jehovah is my savior, and then it ends with Malachi, which would mean my messenger. So it seems like they are literary figures with names designed to represent their purpose in the story, um, which is um, no foreign concept to imaginative storytellers um, like myself. Um, so I guess I want to make this short. I suppose I need to do a master's thesis before I can be able to go to a doctorate. Um, but I've read somewhere that it's possible. Like my friend, when he suggested going for a PhD, he said not something like not necessarily. Maybe the two could be earned simultaneously. I'll have to check into that. So I'm very much into cycles, very much into noticing patterns and what the authors designed, intended. Yes. Oh, I completely forgot about this. So yeah, there's the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint or Septuagint. I've been pronouncing it Septuagint. I can't forget this. Okay, so um, you have the Masoretic. What you read, probably what you read in what you're familiar with, is the Masoretic tradition. Um, there's the Aleppo Codex. There's the Leningrad Codex. We don't have copies of the original text um, of the Torah and the Tanakh at large. I mean the Tanakh and more specifically the Torah, but we do have copies of copies of copies. So as I understand it, the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex were the earliest versions until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have copies, um, earlier datable copies. So I've I've looked into differences between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. The Septuagint being the Greek translation of the Torah. There are differences there. Um, it's a fun puzzle. It's a fun detective story. Figuring out which came first, which changed what. Just because I'm in the Jewish religion, largely following the Masoretic version, doesn't necessarily mean that the Masoretic version was the original. What I suspect is that. Oh, and then I before I go into that, I should mention the Samaritans were our people in the northern area above Israel, um, and they have only retained a version of the Torah. They have not retained. They don't incorporate in the rest of the Tanakh. So what I and there are differences, especially in terms of the pre-flood period. That's when things get really interesting. When you remember the 10 that Adam and then his 9 descendants until the flood. Well, you remember the lifespans. So and so lived and then begat a child and then or son and then lived after he begat so and so years and his total lifespan was such and such. Well, that's how they calculate when the flood occurred, so many years after the creation, or at least the beginning of Adam. Um, so in the Masoretic version that we have, it's 1656 years, and then the Septuagint. There are two versions of the Septuagint, as I understand it: the Alexandrian, and I forget what the other one is. It's LXXA for Alexandrian, LXX, maybe it's Babylonian, LXXV. Oh, I think it's Vaticus, something like that. Anyway, there are two versions of the Septuagint, and there's a Samaritan version, and then there's a Masoretic version, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they have different numbers, some different numbers, but that's enough to change the when the date for when the flood occurred, um, the year for when the flood occurred. I won't get into that right now, but I suspect that there was an original version written with with Moshe Kline's design, and I mean the design that Moshe Kline found, and then there were some changes. Um, the Samaritans branched off, and meanwhile, the Masoretes continued on. Somebody tacked on the rest of the Tanakh onto the Torah, and that's where some of the changes occurred. And that's why the numbers are different. And then there are scribal errors and so forth that creep in. Um, so I guess that's about it for right now. I just want to share with you, and hopefully you were able to follow somewhat along at least. And I'd recommend, if I still have Amazon, I still have a membership as an Amazon associate partnership. In other words, I would get some kickback monetarily by mentioning these. I have used the Jerusalem Bible. That was the first one that my mom bought, and she found one carefully that had the Hebrew on one side with not the English versions, Moses and Aaron and so forth, but transliterated names like Moshe with a dot and so forth, and Aharon. Um, and I think it follows more closely with the English translation. So if you were to get the Jerusalem Bible by Koren Publishing, you would have the Hebrew on one side with the cantillation marks noting how you should sing it, along with the vowel markings and and a few dots to indicate the ha as opposed to ha, which you would not get in purely English translations or transliterations. I like that version. I want to do my own translation of of the Torah, actually. Um, I should also mention, before I forget, that this is much more realistic. It seems much more realistic that somebody wrote the Torah itself, and then somebody else or some other effort was made to incorporate in the Tanakh. Because remember, these are people writing on parchment. They didn't have modern computers. They didn't have nice digital tools like editing and copying and pasting and so forth. It took a lot of work. So just writing the Torah alone would have taken a lot of work. So that seems more realistic, rather than someone writing the entire Tanakh, which for a few days I considered, just simply because of that idea of foreshadowing. Joshua came after Moses, and then that leads to the next section, then leads to the next section. Thought perhaps that was one whole work, but it's too much for one thing. And that could also explain or jibe with the Samaritans having their own version of the Torah, but not the rest of the Tanakh. So, all right. So where was I? Oh, yeah. The Jerusalem Bible. I'll put a link in, and if you go in to Amazon, there's a code you can put in, and or the link I have should have the code in it. Um, there's also a book I will include. I forget the name. I believe it may be just simply called the Samaritan Pentateuch, um, but it does show the differences between, at the very least, between the Masoretic and the Samaritan. I'd highly recommend that. And I guess that's all I have to say right now. If I do find other relevant books or works that you can buy on Amazon, I'll include those Amazon links in the description below. And um, thanks for your patience. Thanks for being there, and I'll talk with you next time. Bye. Oh, also spread the word about this. I have a separate site, a store called vvproductions.media, where you can buy shirts. Right now, they all the design they all have is the YouTube channel design, the YouTube channel logo with the beautiful genie in the stars, amongst the stars. I have different kinds of apparel. I have sweatshirts. I have t-shirts. There's a mug, and I forget what else exactly. Perhaps a notebook for your blank pages for your own use. Please consider going to vvproductions.media. That would really help me a lot, because it would help ensure that I still retain my Verizon account. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do these videos. So thanks. All right, I'll talk with you next time. Bye.